eat because it had been 14 days since they'd had a meal. And they were all encouraged by Paul's promise and that they would all be survived, but they were going to lose the ship and everything in it. And that kind of changed the mood. That was question 18. Aside from being encouraged by what Paul said, now they are hopeful as well. And they're all eating, and it's at that point in the narrative that Luke tells us how many people there were on the ship. And there's some variants, 275, or some older translations have about 76, but I think that's incorrect. Those aren't taken seriously. There were 276 people on board, and I'm assuming that they know now because that's who's being fed. They're all making sure that they were all had something to eat. And so now they're starting to get rid of the ballast. They know they have to run aground. So question 19 is, what did they do the next morning when they spotted land? And the verses are verses 39 through 41. Okay, so the climax of this kind of ill-fated journey is about to be reached, and Luke is very detailed and accurate, and we talked about that at the beginning of this chapter, that people are amazed that a landlubber could give you this kind of detail. At the same time, they know he's not a sailor because of just the way he describes things. So but it is somebody that's giving a first-hand account of what occurred there. And so as the daylight increased, they saw land. They didn't know what land it was. Let me go ahead and read verses 39 through 41. When daylight came, they did not recognize the land, but they saw a bay with a sandy beach where they decided to run the ship aground if they could. Cutting loose the anchors, they left them in the sea and at the same time untied the ropes that held the rudders. Then they hoisted the foresail to the wind and made for the beach. But the ship struck a sandbar, or a shoal, and ran aground. The bow stuck fast. I'm a landlubber too, and would not move, and the stern was broken to pieces by the pounding of the surf. So they didn't know what land it was, and when it says they didn't recognize it, there was no landmarks that any of them had seen before. They just did not know where it was. But what did they see? They saw a bay and a sandy beach. You know, doesn't that sound inviting? This is like the perfect place to go. And we're going to be told later by Luke that this was Malta. And if you have a Smith's Bible Dictionary, he's very convinced that right where St. Paul's Bay is up there, that's now called St. Paul's Bay, is the place where they went. Is this still slide 19, Kevin?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead, Mike.
While they were there, it must have been there, but the storm must have been so bad that they couldn't even see that beach, right? Because they were anchored right there.
Right.
And then the storm had to clear enough. They were sitting right outside that bay when they thrown those anchors.
Right. And they saw the beach after it got light, but the storm is so great, and of course they're not going to be able to see the shoal, and I'll show you that in a moment. So there's a sandy beach, but you can't see the shoal. So this is where Malta sits, and there is a sandbar there, and I'll show you that. So this is Google Earth picture of Malta, and this area here, if you're looking at this slide here, is Sicily, and that's the toe of the boot of Italy up there in the top. And again, this is just Malta, and and this is St. Paul's Bay right here in this little area right here. And now, let's see, if I get a little closer, you can see the shoals out here, the sandbars underneath the water, and you see some in here as well. that are there. And in fact, those shoals are called St. Paul's Shoals, which also just kind of gives you an indication that this may be the spot. But obviously they're named after this. Go ahead.
We talked about last time how they would have, they sensed land, they would have heard that breaking.
Right.
And that would have been a good place to.
Right, and again, I mean, depending on the tide, the depth of the water over those shoals would increase or decrease. Apparently, when they were coming in, the tide was lower, and so the keel of the boat is going to hit those. The thing that's interesting about this is that this is 2,000 years ago, and 2,000 years of history hasn't obliterated all the evidence of what we see here even today. So it's at that point, they see the sandy beach, they see the bay, there's a huge wind behind them still, it's still stormy, and so they see that and they think, this is where we're going to run the ship aground if they could. And so again, cutting loose the anchors, they left them in the sea. So they didn't pull the anchors back up. Mike, didn't we just hear somebody talk about the fact they discovered? Did we talk about that, or did you talk about that?
I found a number of years ago when I was saying, hey, there should be 4 anchors out there. I looked up, and in 1971, a group of people said, well, if this was St. Paul's Bay, there must be 4 anchors. So they mounted an expedition, and they found 4 anchors. They took them to a local university, and this guy verified that this was, all 4 of them were from the Roman era and all the same
Right.
time in that bay.
So just another confirmation of the story that Luke is giving us here. And so, notice it says here at the end of verse 39, where they decided to run the ship aground if they could. And so that's going to, again, require all hands on deck to get all of this done and ready. So they cut loose those anchors, which was holding them there. They removed the lashing from the steering paddles so they can have at least a little bit of control of the direction of the ship, steer the ship in the direction they wanted. And they hoisted the foresail, the sail on the very front, because again, we have a following wind, and so that's going to drive them to make for the beach. And again, what we know that they did not know was the presence of those sandbars or the shoal there. And remember that it's still stormy. This is the stormiest picture I could find. And that's kind of like, you just kind of have to figure that that's what it was like. I mean, this is a horrible, horrible storm. And they are now focused on reaching that distant beach. There's a very interesting thing that happens here in verse 41 when he says, but do all of your translations say, but the ship struck? Do you all have the word ship?
No. Bow.
The bow? And what do you have, Mike?
But striking a reef where 2 seas meet, they ran the vessel.
The vessel? Okay. Yeah, all along before now, Luke has used the same word as the one in verse 38, which is ploion, Ploion, which means ship or vessel or boat. This word here is naun, N-A-U-N. And it is a primitive word that means float or raft. So they're not even considering the vessel that they're on anymore as a viable boat. It's a raft now to get that. They've cut everything loose that they could. And so now it's just going to be a float to get them to the shore. And has no other value than that. And so they indeed did strike that sandbar. The bow was stuck fast, and the stern was broken into pieces by the surf. I just want you, we read that, no, think about being on that boat, or that raft, if you want to look at it that way. And while you're on it, away from the beach, who knows how far, 100, 200 yards, maybe further than that. The boat that you're on is being ripped apart breaking apart by the fierceness of these and intensity of these waves. I can't even imagine that. That would be terrifying. And it's not like, oh, let's take the boat up onto the beach. It wasn't anything like that at all. And so, the force and intensity just amazed me. Any questions on or comments on question 19? Okay, question 20, what were the soldiers about to do? And then why? What were they about to do? They're about to kill all the prisoners. And the verbiage here indicates they planned. It was resolved ahead of time. It wasn't like they gathered together and say, oh no, we're going to be shipwrecked. We need to kill all the prisoners. That this was a decision that they made on the spot there. It's not the result of counsel. This was a rule that they lived by. This was not status quo. It's not modus operandi. There's another Latin term for this is the way you do it. No people speak Latin in here? You must all be barbarians. This was the par for the course. This is the procedure. This is whatever the word is that I'm looking for. It'll probably come to me in the middle of the sermon today. What?
Per se?
No, it's not per se. Anyway, this was the normal protocol, and that's not the word I'm looking for either. But it was the law. Yes.
Didn't you say it right? Modus operandi, isn't that the...
No, modus operandi is what the motive behind what you're doing. And it is to a certain extent, that would be correct. But this was Roman law with regard to prisoners. And the law with regard to prisoners is if you're guarding them, it's what? It's your life or theirs. If the prisoner in your charge gets away, then you're the one that's going to take his place. You're going to die in his place. And so they're responsible for the prisoners, and they were responsible to make sure that they all arrived on the land. You've got 276 people here. Most of them, the vast majority of them, are prisoners. What if one of them gets away? It doesn't have to be all of them. It could just be a few of them. And so it was their life for the prisoners. If you look in Acts, the 12th chapter, Herod obviously lived by that. When Peter got out of prison in Acts 12, after Herod had a thorough search made for him and did not find him, he cross-examined the guards, and what did he then do? When they couldn't find Peter, what happened to the guards? He ordered them to be executed. If you go over to the 16th chapter with the Philippian jailer, and verse 27, the doors are open, couldn't see any soldiers, what's he about to do? He's about to kill himself because that was the honorable thing for him to do, because he was going to be killed because they got away. And Paul said, don't do that. We're still here. So the best way to make sure a prisoner doesn't escape is to do what? Kill him. Okay? That's the best way, especially in a situation like this. So question 21, who stopped them and why? Who stopped them?
The centurion.
Yeah, what's his name? Do you remember? Julius. So Julius stopped him. And obviously his authority, because he's obviously their officer, and the guards' respect for him caused them not to do what they naturally and habitually and had been ingrained in them to do. Because even though he told them not to do that, if one of the soldiers got away, or one of the prisoners got away, they're still on the docket for owing that. So it's a pretty amazing thing that they listened to him and didn't kill them. Besides that, Julius is responsible for all of them too. So Julius's own life is on the line here. I don't think we stop and think about that very often. But Julius is also responsible for the lives of all of these prisoners, so his life was on the line too, and he stopped them. Why?
The question is, if they had disobeyed they would probably have faced the death penalty anyway.
Yeah. That's possible. I mean, you have to imagine the guards are kind of between a rock and a hard place, aren't they? Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. Why did Julius stop them? Randy?
To save Paul.
Exactly. That's it. It's the only reason.
But, I mean, just thinking about this situation like you mentioned, and I think the verse 41, it says that the prow stuck fast and remained immovable, but the stern was being broken up by the violence of the waves. This wasn't a calm situation.
Right.
I don't think, even if he would have let them kill, I don't think he could have killed all the prisoners because the thing's being broken up. And who knows
Yeah.
who's going to go off into the woods
Right.
and
Right.
or get smashed up on the rocks.
Right.
Who knows? So
Yeah, it's just got to be chaos, doesn't it, on board on this ship? Yeah.
You gotta remember, Paul mentioned earlier that not one of them would
Right.
have risked their lives.
Right.
So, in order that they would have tried to kill him, it still would not have succeeded because God spoke.
Right. And I think that's part of the reason here behind Julius doing this. Listen, Julius is not more humane than the rest of these guards. He would have been just exactly like them. And perhaps under different circumstances, he would have joined in killing all the prisoners because he doesn't want to be responsible for them either. But he wanted to spare Paul. And resolving not to kill Paul also resulted in none of the other prisoners being killed. So the blessing of Paul being saved just ran down the rest of the prisoners, and they all came under that same edict of saving them. And I think that our neighbor back there is correct. Paul had promised, he had the promise of God's word that God would save them all. And all included who? Julius and his guards. Listen, remember we read about the shipwreck that Flavius Josephus was in, and there were 600 prisoners or 600 passengers on that ship, and what was it, like 40 or 50 was all that survived out of that? And so you have this, and so for Paul's sake, because Julius believes Paul, based on what Paul said we shouldn't go, and now believing that God's angel appeared to him and gave them hope and encouragement, and Julius trusts him. For Paul's sake,